The cycle of attacks in Gaza resumes as the U.S.'s strong push for a truce results in a ceasefire of only 12 hours. And now the relationship between the U.S. and Israel is showing the signs of stress. Welcome to your Monday lunch break, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. For more analysis on this, we're joined by WSJ Washington Bureau Chief Jerry Seib. Hi, Jerry. Thanks for being with us.
Hi.
So
happy to be with you.
What do we know about the phone call President Obama had with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday?
Well, it sounds as if it was a tense one, and these are two guys who don't have a famously good relationship. In fact, they have a famously tense relationship, and it sounds as if it came through. The White House statement put out afterwards was pretty blunt in saying the president called for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire of temporary duration if necessary that could be followed by a longer-term one, and said essentially it's in the strategic interests of Israel and the U.S. to have that happen. Again, in the nature of these kinds of public statements, it was a pretty blunt indication that the White House, the Obama administration, and Israel disagree now on whether continuing the offensive in Gaza is a good idea or whether it's an idea that's outlived its usefulness. Clearly, the White House thinks the latter. Clearly, the Israelis disagree with that.
And what is the role Secretary of State John Kerry has been playing here? Has he been helping matters or making them worse?
Well, I think that the role of Secretary Kerry is one of the sources of tension between the two countries. He obviously, if you've been paying attention to the news at all in the last week, spent many hours at the end of last week trying to put together a ceasefire. As you said at the outset, it produced only a very temporary 12-hour ceasefire that's now gone away. And so the mission, which was to have a week-long ceasefire, to open space for diplomacy, to have a longer truce between Israel and Hamas worked out, just didn't work out at all. And I think that the problem from the U.S. point of view is not only that it didn't succeed, but that the Israeli government, at least in some quarters, was pretty dismissive of Secretary Kerry and essentially said he was harming Israel's interests by trying to get a ceasefire. The White House statement yesterday after that phone call referred specifically to Secretary Kerry's efforts to get a ceasefire, and you got the sense the U.S. was a little annoyed at the way he was received in Israel. Israel, in turn, thinks that the U.S. is not giving it enough space to go after Hamas military infrastructure and that it needs more time to do that, and that by drawing in others, Turkey and Qatar, who are supporters of Hamas, into the diplomatic conversation, Secretary Kerry did harm to the long-term interests of marginalizing Hamas. So plenty of tension to go around on both sides.
Absolutely, and they're bristling at the equation of Israel with Hamas in any way. But Jerry, I also want to ask you how the issue of the Iran nuclear program is working its way into the Gaza conflict.
Well, not directly, but I think you have to remember it's a part of the backdrop right now. There have been 6 months of negotiations between the U.S. and 5 other international powers on one side and the Iranians on the other over the Iranian nuclear program. And those very negotiations, by their nature, make Israel nervous. Israel's particularly nervous that they have been extended for another 4 months. I think the Israeli view is that this is simply allowing the Iranians to continue to develop what the Israelis think of as the real existential threat they face, which is a potential Iranian nuclear weapon. And so there's some tension between the U.S. and Israel on that front already. Again, it doesn't bear directly on the current conversation about the Gaza Strip and a ceasefire, but it's another sign of tension, and it's a source of mutual suspicion to some extent.
And so, Jerry, as the U.S. and Israel grow further apart in public opinion over this conflict, do you think things are going to get worse before they get any better?
Well, yeah, and I'm not sure it's public opinion so much as government opinion that's at work here. And I do think things will probably get worse before they get better, both for 2 reasons. You're clearly going to have some tense days now in the near term when there's not a ceasefire, despite the best American efforts to put one in place. That's bound to create tension this week, if not beyond. And secondly, those talks that I mentioned between the U.S. and 5 other powers and Iran on its nuclear program are going to resume sometime soon. And once again, that's going to be a source of some friction between the U.S. And Israel about what the ultimate goals of those Iranian nuclear talks really are or ought to be.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Jerry.
Sure.